Hi everyone, this is Allan McKay. In this new car destruction Tyflow tutorial, I want to dig into how to rig up a vehicle inside of Tyflow to be fully destructible and build a workflow for creating car crashes and everything else imaginable. Let's get started. First of all, I want to welcome you to this new video. If you're not familiar with me and my YouTube channel, I am a visual effects supervisor. I've been working in the VFX industry for almost 25 years. I've worked for Industrial Light and Magic, Blur Studio, Ubisoft, Autodesk, Activision, and plenty of other big studios on films like Transformers, Game of Thrones, Star Trek, Superman, Halo, Bioshock, and plenty of others. Finally, I also have a new free visual effects class if you want to check it out right now. It's over 18 hours of free visual effects training focused on taking a real feature film visual effects shot through from beginning to end, working in a real production pipeline. We cover everything from creating pyrotechnics, destruction, and going through photoreal lighting, rendering, and compositing inside of a visual effects workflow. And the class spans over 8 core videos. You can download the entire class for free right now, including all of the HD footage, which was shot on a Red Dragon 6K camera in downtown Los Angeles, and the HDRIs, 3D scene assets, models, and everything else you need to do the class. You can get the class right now. It's free. Go to vfxcourse.com and you can get started right now. I'm only offering this class for a little bit longer, so if this is something that you want to do, this is your chance to take advantage of this opportunity right now and get the free live action visual effects class. Again, it's at vfxcourse.com. Now, for those of you not aware, Tyflow is a new particle plugin for Macs. It's available to download right now for free during the beta development cycle. You can download the plugin at beta.tyflow.com and simply drop the DLO file into your plugins directory for 3ds Max and you'll be good to go. So if you enjoy this video, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to my channel, as I'll try to post videos twice per week, and I've got a lot more visual effects training for Max and Houdini coming up. Finally, right now, I'm just testing the waters with Tyflow. If you want to see more videos and tutorials and free classes on this subject, please take a moment to leave a comment and let me know. I've only got finite time alongside the podcast and everything else I'm doing, and I want to make sure I'm putting my time where it counts. So if this is something that you would like to see more videos on, let me know by leaving a comment. And if it sounds like you do want to see more of these, I'll try to put my attention on building more tutorials for this and for you over the coming weeks. So stay tuned. In the meantime, let's dive into this lesson on car destruction in Tyflow. Okay, so I'm just going to dive right into this. What I've got is a pretty basic car model. I just want to keep with the essentials with what we're doing rather than go too over the top. But what we have is a model that's got topology that is pretty evenly distributed. That's not as critical as it is just to make sure that you have geometry everywhere, so that way it can deform. So what the idea is that we're going to rig this up in a way that we're able to set it as a particle system that we can distribute and deform the actual particle geometry. So to get started with this, I just want to say that this is going to be a very basic workflow for it, and down the line I might do something a lot more robust in terms of actually rigging up a car with suspension, breaking glass, all these different bits and pieces. For now, I'm just trying to more go over broad strokes of the actual process. So initially, I'm just going to make a new group here. I'll call it effects, and I'll just keep it everything inside of here. So making sure that this is an active layer, I want to create a Tyflow node. And the general workflow for this would be that I would want to set up an initial particle system that then gets instanced into a different particle system. So in other words, this is where we'll distribute particles as bones. We'll use it as a wrap deformer, and we'll plug that all into an actor node. So right now that may or may not make any sense, but what we'll have is we'll have one particle system which kind of sets up the basic rigging, and then we'll be referencing that into a bigger system. So with my Tyflow node, Just going to drag this out here, and we'll call this TYF for Tyflow, and then we'll just call this car setup. We'll go to the modify panel and hit open editor. So what I want to do here is I mainly just want to bring in the geometry that I actually want to deform. So I don't really need to worry about any of this right now, except for, what do I call this? Just car body. Okay, so in here I got car body, and I'm just going to drag in, or actually I'm just going to hit tab and type in birth shape. And that'll just bring in a birth shape node. I'm going to pick and choose car body. Okay, so that's just instancing this geometry in. And let's just go display geometry just to show that. I'm going to hide in my layers here. I just want to hide all my geo. Now, this is a model that I don't own the rights to, so obviously I can't share assets when it comes to this. I do have models that I do, car models I do have the rights to, so down the line, like I said, when I do a more robust lesson, I'll definitely try and share something that you can open up the file and work with. But just more as a bird's eye view, this is the general workflow, and I'm keeping it all in one asset so I can easily hide it, unhide it. But the general idea is that this is one piece of geometry that I want to bring in, just so that way it's one clean piece. You can have multiple, but it's easier just to do it this way. Mainly because we need to set up modifiers and do a lot more with it later. So bringing this in, just change that display to geometry, birth shape, center pivots is just a good one to keep in mind in general. It doesn't really matter right now here. And there's a couple of things I want to do. I'm just going to bring in a Voronoi node. I'm just going to use that as a way to kind of break this into segments really easily, and then we can use that to rig everything up. There are other times where I'll actually use splines, and I'll draw splines all over the car mesh and then distribute particles along them to rig this. But the cheap and easy way in this case is just to do a Voronoi fracture. And I'm just going to turn my sound off for a second because it gets annoying. And I'll also do a scale as well. So with the Voronoi, we can already see it's creating these cuts through here. So if I click here, we can see that's where the cuts are appearing. So we can add more points, and that's going to distribute more points to draw the cuts from. What I prefer to do on something that's more concave like this would be to distribute over the surface. So what I'll do here is just random on shape surface, and that's just going to give us a little bit more accurate cuts without needing to use excessive amounts of points. And in this case, I'm going to put it to, I'd say that's probably too extreme, but let's just roll with it for now. You can see by my grid here what kind of scale I'm working at, by the way, but just to clarify, I'm going to go into unit setup using generic units, but here under system units, I'm clicking system units centimeters. Just for anyone who isn't familiar, again, that's the process, but I'm just checking about centimeters, and we can see based on the grid how big that is. There's like a sphere roughly referencing it, so under 100 centimeters. So that's the scale I'm working with. It doesn't really matter too much, it's just more so that way some of my settings might be relevant to that. Okay, so right now I've cut this up, and the good thing about that, if I were to change my display to large dots, we can see all that's done is it's created lots of points. And that's all I care about right now. I'm not using this to drive any dynamics or anything. It's purely just for creating points that I can reference later with doing all the deformation and everything else. So going back to geometry, that's my basic setup, and I just want to go into scale, and we can just bring these in a bit, like to 80, something like that. Just shrink them down a little bit because they will be piped into the physics later on. But yeah, that's the general workflow. Is we just want to get something like that to get it all to distribute nicely. Okay, that is my setup. Now I'm going to go back and change my display. We'll do sprites, And sprites are usually a bit bigger. We'll do large dots. So right now I've got that working, and what I want to do now is go back to my car body. So car body, I'm going to right click, clone, choose as a copy, and we'll call this deform. So we have our initial car body, and this could just be distrib points if you wanted to label it that way, but all it's doing is the original mesh we're using to distribute these points all along it, okay? But after that, we're going to have this cloned object, and I'm going to use the Ty particle skinner, and then click. I'm going to reference my Tyflow, which is using those points, okay? And that's just important. That has to be a separate object, because obviously there'd be a circular dependency if I were to have the original object, deforming or being referenced that way. So adding this on, all it's doing is it's now referencing the original particle system and all of the points that are tied to it. So in other words, we have a mesh, and we also have the rig, like the bones that come with it, because all these points here are essentially bones. So I'm going to unhide all of these just to keep it all clean. We're going to hide the layer. Okay, so that's the general thing, is we just want to initially get all of these points set up, and we have the car deformation here. Now, what I want to do next is I'm going to go back and create another Tyflow node, and this guy is going to be the actual system. So we'll call this TYF, and then we'll just call this car dynamics, whatever we want to call it, okay? For now, I'm just going to hide my original one so it's not as confusing. So we just have one system here, and we'll go back into the modify panel, open editor, and what I want to do next is I'm going to just set up a particle system. And the best way to think about this is that I'm actually creating a brand new particle system, and whatever I'm doing, I'm basically just referencing the shape in. So in this case, I just want to create like one particle to start with. So we'll do a birth, a position icon, and I don't know, let's just start with there. The other thing I'll do is an actor. And the actor is just another way to reference in a shape, but it's actually going to reference in the actual rig that comes with it. So if you're doing humans or whatever you want it to be. Now, in this case, I'm going to go and create an actor node. So we go and create primitives, helpers, and then Tyflow, and then ty actor. We'll drag that in as well. And going to the modify panel, this actor node is going to be importing the rig. Okay, so in other words, I want to click pick, and I want to add in my car interior deform. Sorry, car deform. What am I saying? Car deform. And so that now is bringing in the object, but it's also referencing the original Tyflow attached to it via the particle skinner. Okay. And so that way it'll reference it, and it'll actually use that particle skinner dynamically inside of this. So going back to my birth, I just want to set this to emit one particle. Okay, that's what we want to work with right now. We can see that particle is created there. And with the actor, I just want to click actor object and choose the actor. And that's referenced this in. Now, one thing that is important just to get more accuracy with this is I want to center the actor here onto the pivot of the original object. So if we click align, and then I'm just going to click car body deform and make sure it's on pivot, and I'm just centering it so that way it's where the particle is, the car will be 100% on there as well. Okay, so just to unhide the original car, we can see that those are on top of each other right now. So finally, one more thing, and then I'll go back and kind of re-explain what I've done. While I'm in the create panel, I'm just going to go to helpers again under Tyflow. I'm going to create a Ty icon. And I'm just using this for the position icon. Basically, wherever I emit my particle, that's where this particle is going to be. So that's where the car is now generated. So this is our original setup, and this is our dynamic car one that we just created here. Okay, so hopefully this all makes sense so far. I just want to quickly recap what I've done. We have our original car model, and all I've done is I have the car setup. And again, all that's doing is referencing the original object, it's fracturing it, and then scaling them in a little bit. And one last thing that I will do here is we can do a property, what am I doing? A particle group. And this is how we would break all the glass and everything else later on if we decided to go that route. We can put everything into their own individual buckets. So here, what I can do is I can actually tag everything related to this and put it into particle group 1. And make sure that change is turned on. So that's just going to tag everything as particle group 1. Kind of like if you were in thinking particles, you would have your different particle groups. This is how we can do it here. So I guarantee as people get more mature with Tyflow, we're probably going to need more than 16 groups when you start to build some pretty robust setups. But that's the general workflow. We just brought in the car and we set up this rig, and then we have the second car model, which we put a particle skinner on it and referenced the original particle system we just made. And we don't need to worry about any of this stuff other than that right now. Okay. And finally, we went in and we created a new Tyflow system, which that's not it. And here we are, car dynamics. And all we did is we created one particle and we positioned it, but then we referenced, kind of like we would use a shape reference. We're referencing the entire particle rig on the actor node, which is just right now all it's referencing is the car. So hopefully that makes sense. That's the general workflow, and now already we have this set up. If I wanted more particles, we could, add as many cars as we want. But I just want to have one particle for now while we're getting this set up. And we can see that all the original particles are all distributed on it. So it's working and it's looking cool. So next up, I'm going to create a display node here just so I can have a separate node here. And once the actor is generated, all I want to do is I want to bring it into a new event. And that means that once it's initialized, I can bring it in here and we can set up all the deformation and everything else that we want to do. So, couple of things to get before we get started. Going back to the actor node, if I wanted to change the distribution, if it was multiple ones of these, like when you're setting up big crowd systems, things like that, or trees, whatever you wanted to do, you could do it all in here and adjust that, like the randomization. But and also I can scale this, so if I wanted the car to be smaller, so you've got a lot of controls in there if you're doing forests or whatever you're doing. Main thing is that we're generating a mesh, so this means it's referencing the deformation object rather than the particle system. Okay, we can choose exclude animation. It doesn't matter, there's no animation on here, but maybe that's gonna save us from looking for any deformation, anything like that. The main thing is that rather than an actor particle, we want a rig particle, and the difference is it's going to respect the original particle system as the deformer, so it's using that as its own internal rig. So in here, what I want to do, let's see, let's set up a physics shape. And we say display hull, and so we can see the original shapes that are being referenced in here. Let's do a force, and we'll set the gravity here to -0.1. Now, because of that, we've got the shape working as a physics shape, but we can see it's actually deforming the mesh, which is kind of cool. So initially we have the car, and now it's collapsing down and breaking apart, or deforming apart, I should say. And I'll just make sure that the force is below here. Shouldn't really matter, but I just want to keep it organized. So display hull, we'll turn it off for now. But that's the general workflow. Now I have that deforming. Now what I want to do is use a physics bind. And this will allow us to create a relationship between all of the particles. So that way there will be a relationship. So this is kind of like working with joints or bones, however we want it to be considered. So main thing is we want the physics shape to be above this, so that way it initializes the dynamics, and then we want to define the relationship here. So if we were now to just scroll down to display and turn these on, you can see there's a relationship. You can actually see what that relationship looks like. You can also see you know, the way I look at this, at least, is with the bindings. I look at that more as like the velocity, personally. But, you know, essentially between those two, we can kind of see how it's all working and what's going on. And all we've done is we just have the physics binding, and we just turn this on. Now I'm going to set the max binds to 4, and that just means that each particle can have up to 4 relationships. So you can simplify it, meaning it'll only attach to one piece or another, but the more relationships, the more it's going to stay in place, because it's averaging the position between all of the other points, and they all are. Now, the other thing I want to do is under rigid type, I want to change this to joint, which enables us to have all of these settings here. And the other thing I want to do is I just want to set my distance to be lower. If I was to set this to 2, they're not going to search as far away from each other, right? So we can set the search range. I think like 6 is probably a good starting point. And that means that, you know, it's not averaging too much around each other, so that way it actually has a chance to collapse. So by doing that, it still remains together, but it does have more of a chance to fall apart. Other things I would do is we've got different ways to organize the bindings. I'm going to do sort by volume biggest first, and that way we can just have a bit better distribution, and that seems to work a bit better. Overall, though, I think like all of this is fine. One of the key things that I will do is under bind breaking, we can set the deformation angle, and we can set a maximum. So we could try like 10, 5. We'll play around a little bit more, but just to start out, by setting the deformation bend angles, it's just going to constrict things a little bit, and is less likely to kind of want to reform its original shape. It'll kind of remember the deformations a bit better. So I think from here, a couple of things I want to do. I'm going to set a mass operator for this, and we can set this to be, let's say, 0.1. Just we'll set it quite low, and the main reason is that way when we were to, like, let's say, drop a rock on the car or do something like that, we can set the mass to be quite strong, and that way the relationship will make this yield for the other. The main thing is, if we do this, we need to go to physics shape. Always remember this, because it could come back to bite you. Under dynamics, you have the mass override, so we want to disable that. And it just means if we have a mass node, that's actually going to affect all of this. The other thing is, if we want to, we can set this relative to the physics binding. And this is something to keep in mind if you're doing any granular solver stuff as well for particle binding. Again, it just means that the relationship will affect the relationship of everything working on here. And this is important if we were to, let's say, what's a good example? Let's just say you had some metal or something that you wouldn't have it break, like snap apart. You want to have the binding relationship, but you want the mass to be able to control whether something heavier than it would break it apart. based on the impact. So this is all really important when it comes to relationships with other systems. Now, just going through this, I think the key thing is just to explain, you've got different shapes. So if you were dealing with simple geometry, you could set it up to be, something simpler. If it was more concave, you could do meshes. I've had a few issues with using meshes. The rigid bodies work fine. The particle bindings don't. And, I haven't done enough research to kind of see whether that's just user error or it's just, the way it's set up. It doesn't really accommodate that. Other things to keep in mind is that you've got start penetrations. So you might notice when you're dealing with soft bodies or, any geometry that maybe has like everything compacted quite tight and the collision distances from each normal is a little bit too much. Things might, like on the first couple of frames, kind of bounce away from each other a little bit. This is a way to kind of say just ignore that and consider everything to be initialized on the first frame as the correct distances. So this will be important later, just when we introduce wheels and things like that are going to be very close to the geometry, especially considering that the geo is convex and we've got a max points of 255. Okay, so in other words, we can't get ridiculously complex convex geometry from this, and so there's more chance of, like, in situations like that where technically it should be concave, that we should having these objects in here, they may cause issues. So that is just something I want to mention ahead of time. Okay, at this point, I'm going to go and introduce some more geometry though. So I'm just going to turn off the display bindings just so it's a little less noisy. And if we go back to our actor node, like right now we have the car deformations. We also have this glass. I'm not going to get into the glass in this lesson. I still wanted to include it. If we wanted to deal with glass as well, it's not that big a deal. We just need to set up multiple particle groups and then set that one up to go through a Voronoi fracture once there was an impact or any significant velocity change or collision. So the main thing though is I've got some geometry here and here. These guys I probably won't use, or I'm definitely going to introduce them later. So I'm just going to freeze them for now. I custom made some really crappy geometry for the ground. The main thing is just to have something. The best way to look at this though is, in fact, I'm going to go back to this for a second. Whatever is fine. So the main thing to look at this geometry is these are non-deforming pieces. So these are more collision objects for inside the car to deform around. Because obviously, like right now, we can see that I got a pretty wonky car, but I mean, in real life, it wouldn't be, deforming as much as it is here. But at the same time, like if you were to drop just a car body, a pretty heavy car body by itself with nothing else to kind of reinforce it, I would imagine it's going to deform a little bit, bend and buckle. So what I can do is go back to my actor. I'm gonna keep this on for a moment, and let's just pick the floor. And as I add that floor in, and I'm also going to display this as geometry for that to happen, because right now it's just displaying the skin mesh. So as I enable that as geometry, we can now see that the floor is being added in as well. And then from there, if I wanted, let's just say we'll add in the car tires. So I'm going to add one car tire. We can see it's appearing. Second car tire appearing. And the car tires are not very optimized. Like in reality, what I would probably do is heavily optimize this stuff down, or in fact, set up a parenting system where I'm actually using more simple geometry for the collisions. But because we're using convex anyways, it's not too big a deal. Okay, but right now I've just added them in. So we can see we have wheels, we have the floor, and we have the other two wheels. Now, keep in mind that this is the only one deforming because this is actually using that particle skinner on the other car, and it's referencing that in, whereas these are just considered rigid bodies, okay? That's all they're considered. So now when we look at this, it's kind of using the rigid bodies to kind of reinforce it. So there's nothing up top, so that's tending to collapse down a lot more. But the rest of it kind of has now the ground and the tires to kind of reinforce those areas so they don't collapse down. Obviously, we can get the mesh to still stand up on its own and be a lot more strong, but at least now we're able to test this and start to see what we can get from it. The other thing is that you'll see that there's this particle here which kind of peeks through, and all that is it says mark particles with no geometry. We can just turn that off and it'll get rid of that display. Another important thing is if we want to get rid of, like, you might see that we have the joint geometry. It's not too visible, but there's the geometry, the fracture geometry peeking through. So if we want to get rid of that, I'm just going to drag out this display, turn it off, and we could just do a test specifically splitting out the particle group, which was the original geometry. So I got this property test. I'm going to change this to, should be particle group. Where are we at? There we go, groups. And then I can simply choose group 1 and link that out here to extract all of that out. So all that's done is in our original particle system, we set up the original rig to be a group, and that way we can split this into this empty group where we don't see it. Okay, and then if we want to render anything, we want to put in a mesh operator. Oops, I keep doing that. And the mesh operator will So the mesh operator is just going to allow it to render out. The renderer will actually see it. Okay, so pretty straightforward so far, but this means that now we have all this set up, it's all working. We need to play with the settings more, and that's fine, but I want to get that all working first. If I want to, just because it looks a little bit crazy without it, I want to go back to my actor node, and I'm going to add in the chairs here, the car interior. And the main thing is just to have something in there, so that's going to be used as a collision object too. That should help reinforce it a little bit more, but we can see that it's still all deforming. It's just the resting state is a bit more relaxed now. Okay, there's definitely more we can do. We could add in more. Like I said, I definitely would prefer to use custom geometry for a lot of this rather than the actual geometry, because this is not optimized for what we need. Also, well, technically it is optimized because I have an optimized modifier, so it could be quite high res, but I'm turning that on. But it's not optimized as in it's not really built efficiently for doing car stuff, so I prefer to build a simpler rig and even custom build with splines that I then loft to get like the general wireframe of the car, and then I can put in some physical pieces to use as rigid bodies, mainly to stop it from compacting too much. And the advantage of that is that you could, for instance, set up a few bits like blocks of geometry at the front and back and have them be dynamic, so that way it all compacts down. So if the car were to crash into a wall, it actually would bend in a little bit, things like that. So there's definitely stuff you can do. But for now, we'll just roll with this. And I'm going to hide the car stuff. Let's just focus on, just to kind of finish this up, I'm going to now look at just working on the physics a little bit more to get this to bend and buckle. One thing we can do is I'm going to create a brick wall. And let's do a physics collision. We'll pick the wall. I'll up the restitution a little bit, which will kind of make it repel So in other words, bounce. And like I said, this is just particles. So in this case, I'm adding a speed. And we can just go back into helpers. We're going to get Ty icon. And I'm going to say by icon arrow. I'm going to pick this icon. And that way it's just going to launch it up in the air. Now that's a little bit extreme, but let's try 10. Okay, we can go a bit more than that. So this is a good starting point. Obviously it's a bit weak source. We can definitely work on that, but just to start with, we're now getting this to get impacted. What we could do instead is move this up in the air, and we'll just turn speed off for a moment. And then we can just have it drop on the ground, and we can see it all kind of bend and deform. So just looking at this, you know, right now it's a little bit too flimsy, and so we'll want to go back in here and play with the settings a little bit. It took about 20 frames to hit the ground. I might move it down a little bit more just so we can get that to happen a bit sooner. Okay, so by about 14 frames. So while that's happening, I'm just going to go back in. Let's just put this to like 20,000. Again. And as you can see, that's definitely helping. Same way with dampening, things like that. We can play with these settings a little bit. And it's just controlling how this is going to work. Like when something is affected, whether it goes back to its original state or how easy it does bend and deform. It's the same thing if we want it to be more, you know, to reach more, we can play with the distance, and it's going to average itself out a little bit. What I would do though, so I'm just going back to what I had. What I would do though is going into our Tyflow node now, we start to play with upping the samples because it's not actually giving it much thought, in other words, in process power. So if we go into the physics rollout, I can set the substeps to about 10. The position durations, let's set to 12. We have like CCD, which typically will slow down your simulation quite a lot, but that will help with accuracy at times. So it's good to know that it's there. If like something starts to buckle and weird out, then you can always turn that on, but in general I would keep that off. But having more sampling now, it's less likely to freak out. It's going to calculate more times per frame, or more times per sample I should say, and that will just give us a chance to get more accurate simulations. So that's already giving us something a bit better, because it's not losing itself in between all those big jolts, because is refining itself a lot more. So now that we are getting something a bit better, I can start to play with this a bit more carefully, knowing that I'm going to get accurate sims. I can start to make the relationship smaller, and that way it's more likely to deform, but it's going to do it a lot better. So already, like, that's helping kind of, you know, weaken things out a little bit. I would be more curious at this point to just align this to the ground. Yeah, that's looking good. So this is 100% on the ground. And I think this would be really fun if we went and we added another Tyflow node. I'm going to hold down Shift and clone this, move it up in the air. And let's set up a new birth, a new position, a new force. And with the birth, I'm just going to set this to drop like one rock. The force, I'm going to set this to -0.1, so it's relatively the same. The position, I'm going to pick this item. Now we can see there's a particle generated there. For now, I'll keep it on position, but I'm just going to try and see if I can find a point more close to the center. Whatever, it'll do. So I just wanted something that's going to drop more on top. And let's do a shape. And then let's do a physics shape. So I'm just quickly throwing this together, but the whole point is that we now have a system that will interact with everything else. And I'm going to set this to 3D. I'm going to set it to cube. And I'm also going to drop in a rotation just to randomize it and change the display to geometry. So I'm going through this kind of quickly, but I mean, I'm hoping that it's pretty obvious like how to set something simple like this up. And I'll go through the settings again just in case. But in general, all I want to do is I want to have a birth of one particle, randomize the rotation, the position is up here. We're assigning a 3D cube, we're making it kind of big, giving it some gravity, and then here we're setting up the physics, and we have collision, all this other stuff. I'm going to override the mass. I'm going to set this to like 1,000. And these two physics operators are going to communicate unless we tell them not to. So we can now drop this cube on the car, and we can see that it didn't affect the hood, but it's affecting the roof. So it drops on the hood and kind of crushes the car a little bit. I'm going to hide that wall for a second. Okay. Cube comes down, hits car, and now we're getting that deformation happening. Now if I wanted to, I could instead make this a little bit bigger, make the cubes a bit smaller, make more of them, and they're going to rain down and hit the car. So keep in mind, these cubes are a lot heavier than the car is. So if we want, again, like with the mass override, this is technically set based on the volume. Otherwise, we can do it with the mass operator here. So there's lots of different ways to do it, but like the car is set to 0.1. So this is considerably heavier. So instead, we could do 10, whatever we want, and we can set it all up to be based on the shape as well. But as you can see, that's now deforming it, but it's not like crushing it. So that's, you know, this is where we can control a lot of the impact, like how much it's going to deform the car based on the mass of it. And we can just continue to have this stuff kind of rain down whatever we want. Or if we want, we can have the car itself, you know, launch into the wall. Like we've got a lot of different options here. The other thing to consider is right now, we're just dealing with one car. So what we could do instead is I could set up a new birth voxels. I'm doing this separately just because I'd rather set it up and then deal with this, but I can go and add birth voxels, and we'll just set this to be something like that. Okay, so I'm going to drag the actor just with shift held down. Turn this off. Change this to geometry. I'm also going to make this thinner because we just want to have oops, sorry, I just want the particles to distribute one next to each other. Man, it really wants to put 2 in there, doesn't it? So I think this is fine. I'm just going to choose ignore. Anyway, whole point is that we can distribute and get cars like that, like multiple. I just want to make sure that they're not sitting on each other, because the important thing is to make sure that there's enough space in between them that they're not colliding like what we're getting now. Oops, wrong wall. Okay, so the cool thing is that these are now all particle, like dynamic setup cars. Which we can then rain all these objects down on. So I'm just pointing out, like, there's so many different ways, like so many things we can do with this. The whole point is that they're all rigged up and they're good to go. So in this case, I'm going to make these slightly bigger. There's not too much more to this. I'm going to go over just a couple more things to do with the deformations. But like I said, I wanted to kind of just more showcase this setup. So with this, I'm going to link this back in to here. So now this is piped into the physics. If I were to run this, we'd see all the objects falling down. And we can see it's all smashing the car apart. Now keep in mind, based on the car model, like we can see the front gets smashed the most because it's got nothing to reinforce it. So obviously if we wanted to reinforce it, we can put some geometry in the front here. Same thing if up top. It just depends on what we want to do with this, how we want to simplify everything. So a couple of things. Going to the actor here, you've got properties that you can change. So there is a few controls in here. I honestly have not messed with this too much, but you know, you can go in and do some changes to all this if you wanted to go that extra step. So there is controls in there if you wanted to do a little bit more with it. For now, though, you know, like I said, we don't need to go that far. The main thing is going to be the joints here and also the physics here as well. So we can control the relationship, like who goes with what. We can also turn this on, like I mentioned before. It just means that if there was any issues with collisions in the beginning, it essentially initializes it with like that already set up. But for me, I find that this is all looking good, so we don't need to. There's other things like volume braking. So again, if we wanted to set it where something stretched too much or whatever, then it could lose its relationship. So again, you'd want to keep these on. But the whole point is that way you could get things to tear off, you know, however you want to do it. So there's having, like, let's say a door. Like, there's a few different ways to do things, but they can see that now there's a chance for like the wheels to deform, stuff like that. So again, there's plenty of options with this. Yeah, I mean, we could go on forever, but I want to point out the general workflow to be able to set this up in a way that you have complete control over what you're doing. We can now set this up where, you know, all of these are able to deform and do their thing. I'm going to get this wall move it over here, and just for fun, I'm gonna get a box here. I'm gonna right click, go object properties, turn renderable off, displays box, just so it's not transparent, but it's a wireframe. Let's turn off all the raining rocks and turn everything else off, and just over 90 frames I'm going to animate this box moving across the ground. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I'm just going to make sure that my curve here is 100% linear. So we just have that. Now, what I wouldn't mind doing is setting up a, let's see, I think it'll be a surface test. Hold shift. Sorry, I'm gonna copy, paste this, and I'm gonna just plug it in here. The whole idea would be I could do a surface test and I can pick our cube. I'm just gonna say if they're inside the volume, then we're gonna go in here, and I might just set up a speed. I think it was this guy here, so I'm just going to align this like so. Again, I'm just doing this on the fly, but you know, we might as well end doing something fun. So what we have is, as this cube comes in, it's going to be flipping these cars up in the air. And presumably, okay, maybe they're going to go a bit too crazy, but presumably they're going to hit and smash into that wall. So a couple things I'm going to do. One thing is really cool is we can get our particle bindings and hold control, select both, and go right click, make instances, and that way they share the same settings. And then I could turn off that bind breaking, so at least that way it's not stretching at all and causing any issue. I'm just going to adjust the arrow so it's, in fact, I won't even do that. I'll keep it as is. I just want to get my speed, and I'm going to set this to 140, something like that. So the whole idea is that we can now get these cars, they're going to get shot up in the air and they're all going to crash into each other. We might need to sample this a little bit more. If there's any, you know, weirdness going on, then, you know, we just need to either add more samples or turn on the CCB. But the whole idea is now we've got this stuff kind of crashing into each other. Oh yeah, and we also want to turn on the physics collision. And the property test, I'm going to move into here for the time being. And I'm just going to let this bake out, and let's just see what we get from it. Again, I'm just doing this for fun, but I think it could be kind of cool to do something and just kind of see what kind of results we get. So this here is just an example. Obviously, there's a lot of fine-tuning we can do, and for me, I feel like this lesson's more of a light introduction to the workflow. And like I said from the beginning, what I'd like to do is a much more in-depth lesson, and I think that that would end up being probably a multi-part one, going through the glass dynamic suspension for the car, perhaps even having it being able to be able to drive as well. So again, it's all joints, it's all rigging, but doing it in a procedural way that allows for it to then dynamically adjust based on a particle system. So this sort of thing I've done in Maya, Houdini, and Thinking Particles pretty successfully. We cover this in TP inside of my mentorship more intensely than probably anywhere else, but I think this would be a fun one to cover, just to actually create a fully rigged dynamic car that you could have driving around and smash into a wall and break apart however you want. But like I said, as an introduction, I think this would be a fun way to kind of get introduced to it, and some of the more features such as using the physics binding to allow you to deform things in this fashion. So hopefully you got a lot from it, and I definitely will cover a lot more of this, a lot more in depth in the future as well. Okay, I hope you found this video valuable. Like I said, I would love to do more of these, so if you're interested, leave a comment and let me know. I've only got so much free time I can dedicate to these, so leave a comment and let me know if you want to see more. just type yes in the comments. And if you do want to see more, then I'll try to put out more videos on this subject over the coming weeks. So leave a comment, even a simple yes is enough, and I'll try to build more training for you right away. Finally, I'll be putting out 1 to 2 videos every week around similar visual effects related subjects. So if you found this video valuable, take a moment to subscribe to my channel, and I'll do my best to always serve you with the best possible content and whatever I can to give back to you and the rest of the industry wherever I can. Thanks for watching, and make sure to check out some of the other tutorials in my channel, as I've got a lot of content and I'll be posting more regularly. Also, make sure to check out vfxcourse.com to get the 18-hour free visual effects training class while it's available. Go to vfxcourse.com right now. And like I said earlier, let me know if this is something that you want to see more of. Answer yes in the comments, and I'll do my best to make out more training on Tyflow in the future. Thanks again for watching.